All right, hello and welcome back. It's your boy Hank Hackerson at Hank Hacks Hackers, your favorite network and system attacker. And in today's video, we're going to be going to Vulnerabilities 101, which is a part of the vulnerability research module of the Junior Pentester pathway of Try Hack Me. And the last video that we did was the network security challenge, and that actually is still running. So it's a password attack. Like the very last task for this is a password attack that we're doing and using Hydra to run this. And there's 14 million passwords that it has to go through, and so that's gonna take some time. So while that is running, we're gonna do the vulnerabilities room here. And if you're studying for Pentest Plus or Ethical Hacker or Security Analyst, any of those things, I do invite you to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell, because you will get notified the next time that a video comes out in any of those pathways. And the information in these videos are directly applicable to your certification exams as well as your day-to-day task as a ethical hacker or a vulnerability analyst, security analyst, so on and so forth. So it will be very, very useful to you, and I'm going to do my very best to be as detailed as possible with these instructions, and I answer all of the comments that come in. So if you have any questions or if you have any comments, please drop those as well, and I'll definitely make sure to respond to that. And I give some pretty good detailed answers in the comment section. So if any comments or any questions come up, definitely drop them inside the comment section below. And of course, if you subscribe and you turn on that notification, you'll get notified the next time that a video comes out. And it'll just kind of keep progressing you down this pathway of ethical hacker, penetration tester, security analyst, so on and so forth. And we'll be able to grow together. I would love to have you as a part of our community. And it'll just be really cool to be able to do this whole path and this entire journey together. So that is about it. And from that, now we're going to jump into the introduction of the vulnerabilities room here. So the vulnerability introduction is pretty straightforward. Cybersecurity is a big business. The hacks that we hear about from exploiting vulnerabilities, there's a lot that just keeps updating to these things, and what an actual vulnerability is, what an exploit is, and what you can do as a penetration tester or an ethical hacker to be able to take advantage of vulnerabilities of networks and of systems. So what we're going to talk about is what a vulnerability actually is, why they're worthy of learning about, and how they're rated, and databases for vulnerability research, and how to use vulnerability research on Acme's engagement, which I think is an exercise that we're going to get at the end of this room here. So we are going to jump into the introduction to vulnerabilities. A vulnerability in cybersecurity is defined as a weakness or flaw in the design, implementation, or behavior of a system or an application. We can exploit these weaknesses to gain access or do things that we shouldn't do. The term vulnerability has many definitions by cybersecurity. However, there's minimum variation between all of them. For example, NIST defines vulnerability as a weakness in an information system, system security procedure, internal control implementation that could be exploited or triggered by a threat source. Vulnerabilities can originate from a lot of different factors, including poor design of an application, or just the oversight of an intended action from a user, or the version of a operating system or something that you use that is now outdated, and those versions had certain vulnerabilities that were not patched, and you still are using those old versions. There's a lot of different things that could lead to a vulnerability. And so you can have an OS vulnerability found in the operating system, often resulting in privilege escalation. There's the misconfiguration type of a vulnerability that is about bad configurations for an application or a service. For example, a website exposing customer details. Weak or default credentials, which is one of the more common situations that happen because it's a user error that results to this, and the human link is the weakest link of the cybersecurity chain. And so this is one of the big things to understand, is that you either leave the default credentials that came in when you set up the service, or you have really weak credentials that are, we're testing against right here. This specific password list is the RockU password list, and it has 14 million passwords in it, and these are the most commonly used passwords in the world. So you have something like bitch13, or oxygen, or I don't know, damn it, or Annabelle, or Hottie, or 8888. There's just so many of these things, and they're very common because they still are being used, and that's why they're used for dictionary attacks or password lists and stuff like that. So you have application logic, the vulnerabilities as a result of poorly designed applications, poorly implemented authentication mechanisms that may result in an attacker being able to impersonate somebody. And of course, the human factor. Human factor vulnerabilities leverage human behavior. For example, phishing emails designed to trick somebody into believing that the email is legitimate, and you kind of take advantage of that human element. So as a researcher, we need to assess applications and systems and vulnerabilities against these targets in day-to-day life. So it's crucial to understand what this actually means and what the discovery and exploitation process is really like. So an attacker has been able to upgrade the permissions of their system from user to administrator. What is that? And this is called privilege escalation, which is a part of the operating system. So that is what that is. And then you manage to bypass a login panel using cookies to authenticate. What type of vulnerability is that? And that would be, I would say, a configuration, probably either that, or it could be application logic. That might be one of the things. So I'll do application logic, and that is that. So very good, good intro to vulnerabilities and understanding some of the basics of vulnerability. So let's go and look at the scoring system of vulnerabilities against the CVSS, this Common Vulnerability Scoring System, and VPR. Vulnerability management is the process of evaluating, categorizing, and ultimately remediating threats faced by an organization. It's impossible to patch and remedy every single vulnerability in the network, and sometimes a waste of resources. After all, only approximately 2% of vulnerabilities only ever end up being exploited. This is based on a Kenna Security report. Instead, it's all about addressing the most dangerous ones, which is why there is a scoring system. And it's always in the world of, as always, in the world of IT, there's never just one framework that offers their scoring system. And literally, as I'm talking about it, an alarm goes off in the background. So it was very apt. So Common Vulnerability Scoring System, introduced in 2005. The CVSS is a very popular framework for this, and it's actually embedded into a lot of SIM or IDS scanners or IPS systems. All of these things use the CVSS system to evaluate a vulnerability and score how bad it is, how severe it is. So the three things that it looks at in the CVSS system is how easy is it to exploit that vulnerability? Does the exploit exist for that vulnerability? And does this vulnerability interfere with the CIA triad, which we talked about in one of our last videos, which is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Those three things: confidentiality, integrity of the system, and availability of the resources. Does it actually interfere with that, and how so? And then, so is it easy to exploit the vulnerability? Does an exploit already exist for this thing? And once it does happen, how bad is it? What can it do, and how much does it interfere with the CIA triad? So if there's no scoring system, the rating would be none, means that the score is 0. If it's a low severity, it means that it's 0.1 to 3.9. Medium, 4.0, 6.9. High, 7 to 8.9. And critical is 9 to 10. And you really want to address these two, obviously, and then you want to make sure that you address all of the medium ones as well. But critical is, this is pretty self-explanatory. I don't need to explain this. You just need to make sure that you take care of all of the ones that have either critical or a high severity. So it's not a magic bullet. Some of the advantages and disadvantages are discussed here. It's been around for a long time, but it was never designed to help prioritize vulnerabilities. It's a popular organization and heavily assesses vulnerabilities. However, only 20% of all vulnerabilities have an exploit that's available, and it's a free framework to adopt and recommend. but vulnerabilities rarely change scoring after assessment despite that there are new developments such as new exploits. So this is another thing that is kind of a disadvantage of the CVSS, but it's very, very commonly used. It's probably the most widely used system for vulnerability detection, and this is one of the things that you just need to get very familiar with, along with a lot of other things. So for example, the vulnerability priority rating. The VPR framework is a much more modern framework in vulnerability management developed by Tenable, and it's an industry solutions provider, so that's neither here nor there. This framework is considered to be risk-driven, meaning that vulnerabilities are given a score with a heavy focus on the risk that a vulnerability poses to the organization itself, rather than just the impact, like what happened with CVSS. Unlike CVSS, the VPR scoring takes into account the relevancy of a vulnerability. So no risk is considered regarding vulnerability if the vulnerability doesn't apply to the organization. They don't use the software that is vulnerable, for example. VPR is also considerably dynamic, which means that if changes happen, they probably will update what's going on. VPR also uses a similar scoring range, and we have that over here as well. They don't have a non-informational category, which is fine, and because they use a different scoring method, some of them have a different score than the CVSS. So what we can look at is the advantages and disadvantages of VPR. It's a modern framework, which is real world. It's not open source like some other vulnerability management frameworks, meaning it's not free. VPR considers over 150 factors, but it can only be adopted as a part of a commercial platform. It's risk-driven and used by organizations to help prioritize patching. It does not consider the CIA triad to extend what that CVSS does, meaning that the risk to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data does not play a large factor in scoring vulnerabilities. And scorings are not final, they're very dynamic, meaning that vulnerability should be given, it can change as the vulnerability ages and it changes, and then there's no disadvantages to that. That's pretty solid of a benefit here. There can't be a disadvantage to that. So that is the difference between the CVSS and the VPR. Now it says, what year was the first iteration of CVSS published? And we can find that at the very, very top here. And that is in 2005. So we'll get that right here. It says, if you want to assess vulnerabilities based on the risk that it poses to an organization, what framework would you use? And we're going to do VPR because it actually tells us what risk it does pose to the organization. If you wanted to use a framework that was free and open source, what would you use? And since VPR is not open source, we would use CVSS, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. So that is the difference between the CVSS and the VPR. Now we can go into the vulnerability databases. There are a lot of vulnerability databases. These are just some of the common ones, which is the National Vulnerability Database and ExploitDB. ExploitDB is a really big one. We've used this a lot, and we find vulnerabilities on here. You can use a lot of stuff that you can even put into Google as far as like Google hacking techniques are concerned. And right here, it actually has it down here. So the Google hacking database of ExploitDB shows you just a bunch of stuff that you can use in Google hacking. And I have found a lot of crazy stuff just by running some of these searches. So for example, if we do in URL encryption.txt. So for example, that's a certain parameter. So in URL, you put an asterisk and then encryption.txt. And now you have a Debian sources link that has encryption.txt as a file in it. Apple sources encryption.txt. AMD memory encryption from Linux, or kernel, excuse me, from GitHub. Then the CMU School of Computer Science, documentation from Google. So a lot of these things have encryption.txt in it. And so here's a very, I don't know this website. So myk.lv. And if we click on that, we have the encryption.txt, which looks like his freaking certificate, right? So his authority certificate, which could be used for a lot of things. And if we go to the GitHub link, it gives us information about, you know, a possible repository. If we went to the School of Computer Science encryption.txt file, and then we see that there is some information in here that could potentially be used. And I mean, there's a lot of things that you can just use the Google hacking database for and learn some things about some organizations. I found some lists of users and user names for government entities by just running some very, very basic commands through Google hacking, which is just really insane when you think about it. And there's 7,909 entries for Google hacking that you can use and just kind of go nuts. There's one specific one for a camera. I want to see if we can, let me see if I can find that. Webcam, there you go. So webcam, entitled webcam and URL webcam. And if I use this, more often than not, you can find webcams that you can see. And this is crazy to think about. This is a webcam for some organization. I have no idea where it is, but this is somebody's webcam that we're getting access to. It's the webcam that's on the roof. And then if I go and click on the next one, this is another webcam that we can see. Well, maybe not this one. That's good that they actually blocked that off. Channel Islands live webcam. So these are the different live webcams that are available here. But this isn't even the one. There was a specific one that I found before that you can actually go and look at just only webcam feeds that come out. And I want to see if I can try to find that real quick. Yeah, so here's the Google hack for finding a bunch of webcams just inside of the browser by just searching for this. And this is insane. So you just run that and you click on it and it'll open up the webcam feed of whoever house this is. And I think I can even, can I move this around? I don't know if I can. I don't think I can move that around, but that's one webcam feed and it's not secure as it implies right here. So that's crazy. If we go back to our results, let's see what we can find. Webcam and IP cameras for server windows. So let's see what this one shows us. This is also not a secure link right here. And this is another webcam feed that's showing us right here, webcam XP. And I mean, there's so many of them. These are all webcams that are actually live and showing you the feed from the webcam. It's pretty insane when you think about it. It's kind of scary to think about, but it's very, very insane to think about. And this is, look at this. This one is pretty crazy. This is somebody's, looks like their switch room or their server room, and just a lot of stuff that you should not be able to see by running a simple Google search. But here we are. We're just looking at people's webcams through the server. So it's, you know, you can go through Shodan.io and find an IP address, and then from that IP address, go and start pulling some webcam information, and just kind of go nuts with this. This is here's another one. This is a live feed webcam that's happening. This is from London, Ontario weather. So this is their webcam. It's just a lot. There's a lot that you can do by using Google hacks, which is pretty crazy to think about. So before we dive deep into these, which I already kind of went ahead and did in the Explore database, we need to make sure that we understand some of the fundamental key terms here. Vulnerability is defined as a weakness or flaw. Exploit is something that can be done as an action or behavior that takes advantage of a vulnerability. So it exploits the vulnerability. And then you have the proof of concept, which is a technique or tool that often demonstrates the exploitation of the vulnerability. So you have the NVD, which is the National Vulnerability Database website that lists all publicly categorized vulnerabilities. They're classified under common vulnerabilities and exposures, for short CVE. These CVEs have the formatting of CVE and then the year and then the ID number. And we've used this a lot to try to find exploits on Metasploit for these different CVEs. So you can search through Metasploit based on the CVE number, and it'll show you what all of the current exploits are that we use that. And we've specifically used the WannaCry CVE to actually do some exploits inside of Metasploit and other rooms. So we've definitely been able to use this before. NVD allows you to see all the CVEs that have been actually confirmed, and we can filter by category, month of submission, for example. It's 3 days into August. There have already been 223 new CVEs submitted to this database just from August of 2021, or 3 days into the August of 2021. So NVD, National Vulnerability Database, is a really, really big one. And then the very next one is the Exploit Database, Exploit DB, which is a resource that as hackers we can use to find a lot of helpful information during an assessment. And they retain exploits for software applications stored under the name, author, and version of the software of the application. And we can use it to look for snippets of code, which is proof of concept, that are used in a lot of different variability. So you could actually go search for a specific version of a system, for example, and it'll show you what all the exploits are for that thing, including code that you can use to exploit that specific vulnerability, which is very, 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 very interesting. That they actually provide you with the code to use to exploit the vulnerability. So this is a really, really big one, the Exploit Database, and you already kind of saw the exercise that I ran to just find a bunch of webcams that are freely and openly available online. So that's pretty nuts. Now, using the NVD database, how many CVEs were published in July of 2021? So let's open up the NVD database, and then from here we're going to look for July of 2021. And so I did an advanced search, and in the published date I just looked at, I put between July 1st to July 31st of 2021, and there are 1554 matching records. So let's see if that's the right number. And it is. Who's the author of Exploit DB? That's a good question. Let's try to find that out. At the very bottom right here, it says Exploit Database by OffSec. So OffSec might be the author, Offensive Security, and they are indeed. So just like that, we were able to find some good information and had some fun with the Exploit Database to find some live camera feeds online inside of Google. That's nuts. Okay, so moving on to an example of finding a vulnerability. So we're going to do some vulnerability finding here. An example of finding a vulnerability, we're going to demonstrate the process of finding one minor vulnerability coupled with some research in the databases, leading to a much more valuable vulnerability and ultimately an exploit. So throughout an assessment, we're going to find multiple vulnerabilities to get results. For example, in this, we're going to get the version disclosure vulnerability to find out the version of an application. With this version, we can use the exploit database to search for any exploits that work with that version. And then applications and softwares usually have a version number. So this is usually left with good intentions. For example, the author can support multiple versions of the software. Or sometimes just left unintentionally because they didn't even think about it. For example, in the screenshot here, we can see that the name and version is right at the top right here. So Apache Tomcat 9.0.17. And you just basically get some basic information on it. And then with here, we can just go and search for Tomcat 9.0. And you'll see several things, 5 different entries for Apache Tomcat. And then there's a cross-site scripting, open redirect, sandbox escape, and remote code executions. So after that, we can search exploit DB, or we searched exploit DB to find what was going on over here. So what type of vulnerability did we use to find the name and version of the application in this example? And that was the version disclosure vulnerability that we just used. So we're going to copy that, and we're going to put that right here, and that'll be our answer. I thought we were going to jump much deeper into it, but very, very simple, right? You just kind of try to see what the version of the thing is, and then you go and search for that version, and from there you actually get to see inside Exploit Database that there are several version vulnerabilities that exist, exploits that exist for that specific version of the Apache server. So now we can move on to the showcase exercise and see what we can find for Acme's application here. And so we're going to view the site and see what we can get. The showcase exercise says that it's our first week on the job as a junior pen tester, and for our first engagement, we're just shadowing somebody within the company. To deploy the site attached, we're gonna click on that vulnerability and then see what we can find. So complete the engagement and retrieve the flag. So let's do that. Let's go in here and see what we got here. It says it's your first week at the pen testing co as a junior pen tester. To ease into the role, you're shadowing somebody, and the senior pen tester has managed to find a vulnerability in a web application that the client, which is Acme IT Services, uses. And we're going to follow the steps to see what's going on. So this is what we see here, and thank you for signing up. This is the email. It looks like we're in their webmail. So we're going to click next. And then when we look at it, so at this stage, the senior pen tester has used a public service that compiles some details about the target company. And we can see that Acme IT service provider services 800 clients. And this information is useful because we can begin to think about possible software that they're using. So for example, help desk or a support application, which is available on companiesreport.thm, THM Acme IT Services, and then on their company's report, it says that this is the company info, business type, IT support services, 800 clients. So they use stuff for IT support, and this is their CEO, and the CEO's email is here. Okay, so now we are going to move on to enumeration to see what we can find here, the type of services and ports and all those things. So we can use the information gathered to begin to understand what services may be viable. For example, a web server. So this is their IP address, so 228.189.136. And then now we're going to run Nmap and see what we can find from our Nmap scan here. And we got it. We got the SSH port that's open. We got the HTTP and HTTPS ports that are open. And so now we have some good information here. So let's see what we can get next. So this is their web portal that's available on port. It doesn't really tell us what port, but using the information gathered from stage 2, the pen tester was visited the target in their web browser and has been greeted with a login page. So this is basically their IP address that we just went to, and that's literally it. That's all they had to do. And this is a login portal. They get some random passwords such as admin and admin to no avail. So they notice a version number of the application 1.5.2, and we take note of this, and we're going to be using it for the next stage. So version 1.5.2 here. So we're going to go to the vulnerability bank and search for 1.5.2 and listing vulnerabilities since 2001. So I wonder if I have to do this, or so. Okay, let's read it. Application called Acme Portal that has a version number. Vulnerability exploit database called Vulnerability Bank. This website stores details of vulnerabilities and exploits for applications. Senior pen tester searches this site for the software and was discovered in stage 3, and they're in luck. There's one vulnerability listed for the application version, which is remote code execution. And remote code execution allows commands to be executed on the target system remotely, right? So we could use this vulnerability to gain access to the console of the target. So we're going to search Vulnerability Bank for the Acme Portal 1.5.2. So I'm just going to copy this and paste that and then search. Press enter, I guess. There we go. So Acme Portal 1.5.2, remote code execution. Right there, we got it. So now let's look at the next thing here. Use to answer the question. Oh, I mean, here's the flag. So this is the flag that we needed for our answer. But let's see. Okay, so accumulating the information about the previous stages. We used the exploit downloaded from Vulnerability Bank against Acme's web application on here, and the exploit is successful and abuses the remote code execution to get a reverse shell on their infrastructure. From here, we can look for files of value such as passwords, backups, or application source code. And just like that, we ran the exploit for this user, and then they ran the exploitation complete, and it launched the shell, and we got an administrator shell on the Acme IT services, which is no good. So now we can paste our flag here and be done with it. And just like that, we wrapped our Vulnerabilities 101 room. And let's see if this thing is still running. It is still running the password search here. It is now up to 16,000. So it's making progress, but it's definitely nowhere near millions. So this is probably gonna run all day, honestly. But okay, so let's move on to the next one right here, which is going to be our conclusion, and we will wrap the room. In conclusion, we've made it to the end here, which is basically just saying, hey, congratulations, you made it to the end. And we're going to move on to the next one, which is the next piece for vulnerability research, which is exploit vulnerabilities. And that'll be our next room. So we did complete this one. Congratulations for being here with me as we went through the completion of this thing. This was pretty straightforward, nothing crazy. And we got a chance to run some, Google hacking techniques to find some live webcam feeds. So that's always fun. We're going to post this. If you learned anything from this room, or if you're going to continue learning down the penetration tester pathway, I do invite you to like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so that you get notified the next time that we drop something. And it is a great source of information for both your examinations as well as your day-to-day tasks of the work that you'll be doing when you go in a penetration tester role or an ethical hacker role, so on and so forth. So very, very much encourage you to like, subscribe, turn on notification. If you have any questions, drop a comment, and I will definitely respond to your comments and your questions. And it would just be very lovely to have you as a part of our community so that we can grow together and become ethical hackers together. That is about it for this one. It's your boy Hank Hackerson at Hank Hacks Hackers, your favorite network and system attacker. It was lovely to have you here. Hopefully you learned a lot. If no one else loves you, Hank loves you. Love, peace, and chicken grease. And I will see you in the next video. Later.